finance committee order, since we have a quorum. Does not appear that we have any members by Zoom, so, I think we're good. Jim Healy will not be joining us, it looks like. Okay, any citizen requests to address the finance? Committee? Seeing none, move on to the next item. Approval of minutes of prior meetings. You should have received the minutes on January 3rd. And the ones for January 17 will be for next week. So if everybody has had a chance to review them?
I did. Second.
Did you have,
No, I was gonna do one of those two things, but they beat me to it.
okay,
I want to just thank Catherine for your help with this.
Yes.
you're welcome.
Thank you. So it was a motion in a second, right?
Yep. All right, we don't need a roll call, so all those in favor?
Aye.
So it's 5-0. All right, departmental budget hearings, we have the building department.
Come on down.
Thank you.
And that is tab number 1.
I can do a brief introduction. I think it's gonna be pretty simple and straightforward. Joe Prondak is our building commissioner for how many months now?
7 months.
7 months. So this is your first time through this budget cycle, so welcome and
Thank you.
thank you for your service to the town. The FY 24 budget was, that we're in the fiscal year that we're in currently is $894,312. The proposed budget for next fiscal year 25 is approximately $7,000 increase or 1%, bringing it up to $901,434. That's comprised of approximately $850,000 in salaries, broken up between 8 FTEs and then 3 part-time persons. That headcount has been consistent over the past several years. And then the remainder of the budget is $51,400 in various expenses that are outlined in the budget book, which again are consistent with prior years. There are no DSR fours. And that's the overview.
Oh, I actually did meet with Joe. One of the things I think, you sort of took what you were handed and as you were telling us and because you're relatively new, so haven't really had the opportunity to create it from scratch, but I think the one item that did stand out was this, there's $20,000 for fire protection consultant. That was planned, I think, for the Lucky project, which isn't happening or isn't on the table to happen anytime soon. So that may come back. That's what that number was for.
Yeah, so I think that that money was in the budget, in the prior year and that project has not happened yet. But it wasn't, my understanding is it wasn't exclusively for that project. It was for projects like that or similar projects that require now, intense fire protection systems, as required by a code, by the particular code that regulates those. So, there could be other projects that would require that outside consultant to review that part of the project. And that benefits both my office and the fire department, in their review of it. So it would, we could expect that be left in. That's what I have on that.
Dave?
Just to add to what Joe's comment is, the committee may remember, it was a few years ago, it used to be in the fire department's budget and they reduced it because by code, the building inspector is responsible for that analysis. So that's how it ended up there.
To me, one of the striking things is for the amount of money that we spend in the departmental budget, it's a huge moneymaker.
Especially this year.
Well, in FY 23, it was 4.8 million. I'm sure it's something similar.
So I don't expect it to be that much. There was a spike in the income, previous year, due to the, Children's Hospital project, which by itself brought in about $2 million.
Okay.
So I don't foresee
But,
any.
but the point is, for the money spent in the department, what it generates revenue wise, pays for itself multiple times over.
So, in our meeting, you did ask me for a brief summary of the permit activity. So, and I just did the total permits because it can be such a moving target to go into more detail. So last year, the department issued a total of 4,151 permits. That's electrical, plumbing, mechanical, building. And this year, we're at 2,544 so far in 7 months. So last year it averaged about 346 permits per month, and this year we're up to about 363 per month, so a tick higher. But again, that could change at it could spike at any time and it could fall off at any time. It all depends on the
Probably
economy.
interesting given the level of retail, I mean, sales activity has declined. In town.
Maybe renovation?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the projects were in the pipeline or planned before the interest rates happened, and before the price hikes happened, so. That tends to follow later.
Right. But you're saying that it hasn't really changed in the last 7 months.
Yeah, we're looking at the same volume at the moment.
If I recall, you did say you still have 2 open positions, correct?
We do, and we finally have selected candidates for both.
Awesome.
Well, we'll be starting on February 20th, so there was vacancies for on a full-time position since October, and a part-time position since November, so there will be some feedback on salaries in this current fiscal year.
Great, good to hear.
But those are filled now.
They will be starting on February 20th,
Okay.
both positions, so we're happy for that because it really does throw us off when we're short needed.
Any questions from the committee? Yeah.
Sorry, this is already asked. Do you anticipate any additional costs to your department or time related to enforcement of the Upton Stretch Energy Code?
Not necessarily. That is kind of a moving target as well. So there's going to be an adjustment period. At least for the first 6 months to a year, as you know, the state wrote this new code. But until we actually implement it, we're really not sure how it's going to have an effect. So, at the moment, it looks like we'll be fine. And I'm gonna stick with that for now and hope that holds true.
Questions from other committee members? I have a couple questions.
Mhm.
Sealer of weights and measures,
Yes.
what are we doing right now?
That's been transferred to Norfolk County and we paid them $12,000 a year
Okay,
for
so
that.
that's why it's in the professional and technical services.
Correct.
All right, and how does that work? Is it scheduled, like they're scheduled to come in at certain times?
Yeah, they've arranged with the various vendors, to do their inspections. They have a schedule all laid out, and then when they do the inspection, they inform us that it's been done, and then we bill the vendor, for their services. We are, along with the town manager's office, looking at revising that fee schedule. There's been a lot of looking into what other cities and towns are doing, because it hasn't been updated since 1996.
Okay. And if there's any enforcement needed with respect to weights and measures, how does that work?
Well, typically, there's really not enforcement involved. Most of it is scales.
Right, so if they're not, they
they-
need to
they
be fixed,
just-
they don't,
They
they
just,
don't work properly.
yeah, the county inspector will just not approve the scale. The store won't be able to use it unless it's sealed.
Okay,
And the same goes with gas pumps as well. We can literally turn them off.
okay. And then I think you answered my other question, which was whether the total fees were gonna translate to new growth, but the answer is no for the children's hospital.
A portion of it was captured this year in the balance we
Okay,
caught during FY 25.
okay. All right, any other questions?
Not here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much.
All right, so moving on to the finance department. This is including technology.
Maybe yes.
All
Yeah,
right, and that is tab number 9.
class act.
So I'm just gonna read
Well,
them to what I'm going to read. Okay, so, everybody's at tab 9. Salary and wages technically are up $259,000, which translates to 12.2% from fiscal year 24. But this isn't just the true picture, because this fiscal year, as approved at the special town meeting in October, salary and wages was decreased by $240,000 and transferred to services for contractor services. That would be for technology and security support services for public safety functions and general health tech services, which is also the subject of a DSR4 request for fiscal year 25. If those expenses are transferred back to the salary line in fiscal 24, then the actual increase is only 2.1% increase, which is attributable to step increases. There is no COLA yet, since the union contract has not yet been signed. The potential FY 25 amount would be increased by whatever the COLA is. And there have been no negotiations yet, is that right, Dave?
Kickoff was today with ITW.
All right, the kickoff was today. If the contract is approved, then obviously the money in townwide expenses would be shifted to salary and wages during fiscal year 25. It's highly unlikely it will be completed, I think, prior to printing of the warrant.
I think that's a simple assumption.
All right. Moving on to services, supplies and other expenses. The current FY 25 submission is $48,000 lower than FY 24, but again, that relates back to that $240,000 that was shifted at the October special town meeting. Apples to apples comparison shows that there's an actual increase of $213,000, which is a 16% increase. The main drivers are $58,000 to hire a firm to oversee our state required 5-year certification process to confirm our finance processes comply with state law. $26,000 for outside network IT services based on increased state contract services. $71,000 for increased annual software license fee prices and increased number of subscriptions, and then inflation impact to price of office equipment, IT supplies, toner, and amount of postage. So historically, the number of FTEs in the department was 25, but for the current fiscal year, GIS position transferred to DPW engineering, which we talked about in a different meeting. So the FY 25 submission has the same number of FTEs as this current fiscal year. Operating budget capital is 102, which is an annual allowance to permit finance to purchase new desktops, laptops as needed. There are approximately 400 units on the town side, and the life of a high-end user is about 4 years, low-end user about 6 years. Based on the regular life cycle, the greatest number of units ever replaced in 1 year was 80 and the lowest was 40. This year's proposed purchase is for 65 units, which is within the norm. The overall budget from this current fiscal year to FY 25 is up by $213,000 or 5.6%, which is mostly driven by inflation factors. The 5-year state certification process and the increases to purchasing IT services and the increased cost from higher software license fees and an increased number of subscriptions. There are 2 DSR4s. $248,000 to enter into a contract with an outside vendor to provide permanent contracted services to support public safety IT services 24/7. including a help desk for such services. They would use a vendor on the state contract list, and there's a quote for this price, for the 248. 16,500 to purchase a multifunction printer, 15,000 of which is a one-time capital cost, and 1,500 is a recurring cost for supplies and maintenance. Finance has found that purchasing printers is more favorable than leasing because they have a longer life and are less expensive over time. This unit would be mostly for the town manager's office. Jim concludes, as always, Dave and his team were a pleasure to meet, and I found them fully transparent and very detail oriented. And he refers to, and I hope we don't leave anyone out, Dave, joined by Cecilia Sinchuk, Michelle Valancourt, Diane Ryan, Wendy Fung, and Melissa Mata. Okay.
Can you tell Jim that they actually didn't enjoy meeting with him?
I'll tell him to watch the tape. So,
They tolerated him.
yeah, for apparently a very long period of time. So that is the summary. I think that was there another, technology meeting with the school department recently? So maybe we can talk about that too, as we discuss the finance department budget, because I think the technology piece, is, I mean, it's a big part of the finance department's budget.
So I guess my question,
Mhm.
because I did sit on that, and then relates to this DSR four, I guess why isn't this DSR four part of
Mhm.
that, David?
It will be if we move forward, but when this budget was submitted, we had yet to know the school committee was gonna be receptive to the consolidation. So the budget that's submitted is based on the old model. If the consolidation is approved, what would happen is the 248, which is a DSR four in this budget, would be part of the financial warrant article that the school department has submitted. And the expenses associated with IT operations, salary and expenses and capital would all be stripped out of the finance department budget and put into the consolidated budget.
And the 248 though is a DSR four,
Correct, because it is a new
even if
service.
it's consolidated.
Even if it's consolidated, because it's still the issue of the 24/7 support, primarily for public safety and keeping their operations. And the help desk piece is a help desk for the IT people, so not like people like me, but the IT people, if they're having complex issues, they have a person that can walk through a problem with network or a server issue.
So how are the services that are going to be provided, the 24/7 services? How are they being provided now?
They may be provided by a contract, that's why we moved the money from salary and wages and finance this year to expenses. And hence why I know what the pricing is for FY 25, because we're currently under contract with them till June 30th.
The other components, I mean, the superintendent expressed a desire to come and talk to
Mhm.
with us.
Yes, we
separately as
will.
well.
Yeah, we'll have another meeting.
Since there are many departments that rely on IT, and all, I would say,
All,
right? There's a desire to create a sort of committee, amongst the departments to make sure that that the level of service is meeting all the departments' needs. I don't know, I think that's still in flux, how that would be formed, but.
Yeah, there's several components to this that still have yet to be discussed, such as the working group is in the bylaw. Here in the one, there is collective bargaining implications because some of the staff is in the ITWA union, so that has to be impact bargaining. So there's a number of pieces.
There was also a suggestion that there would be a memorandum of understanding drafted between the school department and the town manager, because the reporting responsibility, I mean, though it be in the school department, or it hasn't really been vetted yet, how that's going to work, so.
And I raised the suggestion, I actually don't know if this mechanism is allowed. But could it be budgeted on its own outside of the school department budget, but clearly under the direction of the superintendent?
Legally,
Okay. And I guess the reason why I suggest that is because the things in the school department budget can move around. They can adjust their budget during the year. And so this way, at least those monies for IT are in some ways protected. I don't mean that pejoratively, but like, you know,
We understand. what you mean. Yeah. So, and especially, I would emphasize, especially when you're talking about public safety and then really finance. I mean, I would say finance is probably one of the big users aside from public safety of
and
IT
public-
services.
And public works, public works of today is much more reliant on technology than it was
Than they were.
20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. So that's an interesting idea, having a separate line for IT. Okay. And how are you doing with staffing? Can we ask that question?
It's been a challenge last few years, as the committee is aware, and in fact, that's what contributed to the higher turn back in the last couple of years, because of all the vacancies. IT, of course, is, so we have five of the 7 positions vacant. And which there's lots of things that are not getting done, even to the extent that schools are assisting us. We haven't contracted services. There is, if you were to take a survey amongst the departments, they're tolerating our response time. But they're on hold until we know the structure of the new organization, because we certainly don't want to bring people on board and have it change on them. In Treasurer Collector's Office, we just filled the last of the support positions this week. The individual started this week, the counter person, actually. The Treasurer Collector's position is still vacant, but we have a promising candidate. So hopefully that will be resolved before the end of the fiscal year. Accounting is fully staffed. Assessing is fully staffed. And I'm happy to say that my position, which is now the Assistant Finance Director, Cecilia Semchek, after 2 years, it's finally filled. Oh.
Members have questions, specific questions about specific budgets? I have a specific question about assessing, about overlay.
Yes.
Okay, so the overlay, I think in the budget is at like $1.9 million. So where are you with that and where are you with abatements right now?
Well, actually, I'll turn it over to Melissa. Yes.
So the deadline for abatements is tomorrow at 5 p.m. And we typically get some are allowed to be mailed in, so usually another 8 or 10 days before that. And then once we get those, we'll have a better idea. At this point, we have less than half the applications that we did last year. So hopefully that won't change tomorrow and
That's
then. next week.
promising, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you know what you have right now in the overlay, what you have for balance?
We have, I believe it's probably 3.9 million is what we call, and that's basically what we need with the combination of what's uncollected and what's pending, potential pending at ATV, and plus, and then we have our annual allotment this fiscal year.
It just was so much smaller this year.
Yes, and there was a major release, as you may recall, back in July, 3 million, which some of the money was used at the October town meeting and the balance is proposed to be used at the annual town meeting.
Is there any kind of standard methodology you use to figure out what you would add for a particular year? Is it consistent? Or is it also an algorithm plus real data? How do you do it?
I go through the approach that I take. First off, the annual amount, we look to be in a range. We look over a 5-year average, what we've been at, and like to be in the range between 1.2 and 1.6% of the levy limit. Then the next thing that I look at is the total of all the overlay reserves. I have that gross amount. I reduce from that the outstanding taxes that have not been paid, reduce from that any potential ATV cases or unresolved abatement applications. And then after I've done that calculation, that determines what could be released by the Board of Assessors as overall surplus. So there is methodology in terms of what the amount will be set for the year and how we get to determine what could be safely released for overall surplus.
And the Board of Assessors votes on the overlay surplus. Do they also vote on the amount that for next year that goes to the overlay?
And generally, it's DOR that does the approval. It's basically the balancing.
Yeah,
mechanism.
yeah. Okay.
But you're aware of the amount and
Yeah.
the compensation.
And does each layer for a year stand on its own and then get released, or does it roll forward with the larger?
In fact, in your original tenure in the finance committee, it used to be year by year. But the law was modified several years ago, that now allows it to be a single pool, which rolls over. So you don't have this odd thing is, oh, well, we have a deficit, so we have to go to town meeting to appropriate to cover the deficit. Even though we have this large surplus elsewhere.
I lived that.
Yeah.
I lived that and I was not happy.
Yes, correct. So now that's, and hence also go through that exercise, so we don't have surprises. One of the things that I anticipate when we get, closer to the setting the tax rate for FY 25 is because this is the 5-year recertification, where all the values in town are looked at, and this is the process which the assessor staff has to do in the documentation that they need to provide to the Department of Revenue. Hence, particularly in the commercial and personal property sector, the consultant that the assessor's office needs to rely upon, as Jim referenced in his write-up, that usually may generate more abatement activity only because more people's properties may be adjusted. It gets advertised as a public hearing process of those new values, which generates more attention. So that could generate additional applications, which could result in errors being found. So hence, I would anticipate that would be higher than in a standard year. The other thing is, as Melissa just mentioned, that this was half the number of last year. I think one of the drivers of that was this particular tax year had the lowest increase in the average tax bill in 20 years. So,
Because of excluded.
because excluded debt was
Came down,
declining. So I think,
Coming up again.
Oh, it does next year.
Oh, okay,
It's.
one more time.
and plus we had extraordinary new growth as well.
Yeah.
So because of those reasons, I think that impacts this. Oftentimes, when people are saying the challenging the value, they're not really the value, it's the tax bill, but it is the value that determines the tax bill. And more often, Melissa can certainly attest to her experiences, more often than not, the people do agree that the value is correct.
Mhm.
Because it's a willing buyer to a willing seller and.
And then there's Zillow.
Yeah, so it's
Zillow.
mostly an education process.
Do we still publish the whole town, I mean, It used to be in the
The
paper, right?
values, yeah.
Once a year, so that people can see what their neighbors, to me, that's what would cause the most issues when you see what your house is valued at versus your neighbors. But I don't, it's not distributed anymore, I assume, but it's probably available.
It's available, the paper does request it.
I thought it comes out in the patch
What?
once a year. doesn't
In the
it?
hometown weekly.
Yeah, hometown weekly, yes.
Did we get the request this year yet?
Yes, they
Yeah.
published it, a week or two ago.
Oh, okay. I haven't looked at that.
I missed it
I'm
too.
gonna look
It's probably sitting on my coffee table.
As well as you can look at anything on the website anyways.
Right,
It's just harder to look it up that way.
yeah,
Have to type in the addresses.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
The observer should do a study.
We can link it for everyone. Okay.
you guys have, I think, comment.
Any other questions from the committee? No? Well, thank you so much for coming, staying today. Thank you. You were prepared. Deb, Jim isn't here to follow up. Oh, sorry. All right, the rest of townwide expenses, tab 25. All right, so the first one is on page 1, casualty liability property and health insurance program. I mean, basically, this budget is up about 5.8%, and it comes down to cost of, buildings and cost of construction. We're planning on adding Emery Rover next year, so I mean, there's not much we can do. The prices are competitive. There are not a lot of insurers in the market. I'm only aware of 3, one of which we would never want to do business with. So that really only leaves 2. Maya does provide very good support services for the town. And Dave, reminded me that before Maya, we had a full-time employee managing our insurance plan. Maya now manages it all for us as part of, our premium. And then the other advantage of Maya is the training. A lot of training is provided on an ongoing basis, and we get bonus points for participating, in those training programs. So any questions on the casualty liability, property and self-insurance? All right, so next is debt service, which is the next page. So. Let's see, debt service, Dave and I talked about, I mean, debt service is what it is. You know, basically, we're anticipating borrowing a certain amount, we know what we're going to borrow. And unless something really funky happens with our projections on, no, even if something funky happens, nothing for next fiscal year, you know.
No.
This is based upon things. already
Yeah,
approved.
things that already were approved, so there's no issue with respect to debt service. What Dave and I did talk about was the debt service policies again. We know we're gonna exceed them. I know we tried, John, I don't remember when was that, 3-4 years ago? To talk about the debt service policies with the select board. It's
Yeah.
probably a good idea for us to do that again. You know, I personally don't like having a policy and then saying, well, we're just not gonna follow this policy. Like, let's, you know, try to get together again and put together a policy that makes sense for the town and that we're actually going to, try to follow, even if we know that in particular years, we might exceed whatever our guidelines are, but right now, I think it makes it really hard for planning. And this was just something, opportunity to talk about it since we're looking at that budget.
Well, what's the hard part about planning? Is it only because the cost of projects coming up?
Is it
Because the cost of
increasing?
extraction is gonna be so much that, those policies can't be adhered to based on the price of the project.
Just cost of construction,
Okay.
yeah, based on inflation.
But, I mean, it's fair, I think it's fair to understand what the implications of that are. You know, it's, listen, we can make the policy
Whatever.
whatever we want, but, you know, if our, you know, we have to, our goal is to maintain our AAA rating, right? You know, what do we have to, or try to understand? I realize it's not hard and fast, but what policies will allow us, because it's, I think Dave said in the past, it's really, this is not as much the policy itself, but our adherence to the policy consistency, right?
Right, it's consistency.
But it would be helpful to know though,
Right,
the bands
Correct.
around, like, our overriding goal is to maintain our AAA rating. So what are the bands around that
right.
kind of lower and higher that will allow us to do that? And I think it's also important to know, I'm not suggesting we want to do this, but I think we should help town meeting and the citizens understand the cost of not being AAA rated, which is not insignificant, I would imagine, so.
Particularly the fact that the town is carrying position.
Yeah,
So I think that those are things that we need to, you know, understand.
Do we have any form of comparison to what we would call like communities that are AAA rated and what type of percentage policies they have and is that any type, is there
It is
any relevance to that?
Well, certainly, having to understand what other communities are comparable are doing is important. But every community is so different in
Right.
terms of how they, structure their policies and their issuance of debt. The key one that, the chair was referring to, it's not the within the levy limit, which we have not exceeded and do, a very good job of not exceeding. It's the 10% when you take into account all the types of debt service. And the item that drives us up over the 10% are those expensive projects, which are done by, generally by debt exclusion. Hence why, although we've exceeded our, the 10%, target, it is not as concerning to the rating agency
Because
because
it's voluntary.
there's an affirmative vote of the public
right.
to support paying that additional amount. Whereas if we were doing that without the voter approval, there would be more of a concern. So again, it's on the basis of the structure of the debt and how you got to the point of your annual debt service. As the chair mentioned in the conversation, one of the things that has changed since the policy was written is we have the addition of CPA and CPA debt. We've never changed the policy or the 10% or 3%, but that CPA debt counts within that calculation for it into the 10%. So.
Well, that's an important distinction.
Yeah. But the other reason I think it should be discussed is that if we're never following, like if we're so far over the policy and never following it, then it
Yeah.
becomes irrelevant
Right.
and everybody says, well, you know,
Right.
who cares about that policy?
Right.
It also makes it expensive to live here. Because all of those projects are done by excluded debt,
Of course.
so.
The water debt that was issued last year, was that eligible for zero interest?
No, that one was not.
Was not,
But you're gonna look at,
Oh,
Some
we
of
were
these,
always
yeah.
looking at that, and in fact, the sewer project that is, that when we are discussing the warrant articles later on, next month, $12 million debt service, we're gonna be seeing how much we can leverage, either MWRA or the low interest loan. MWRA is the entity that provides a zero fund, but the state treasurer's office also has a lower interest rate, which, in the time of the low interest rates really didn't it wasn't advantageous to us because it basically offered the same rate that needed to obtain on its own because of its AAA rating. But without the extra administrative expenses, there is an administrative fee that you have to pay. This is the treasurer's office, but if the interest rates stay as they are, there may be value to that. But it's a competitive process in order to receive that. In fact, one of the projects we submitted, we found that where it looks as though we won't be able to secure the financing through the trust.
The way the debt limit, sorry, back to the debt limit, so the way it's written, I mean. It really incentivizes the town to borrow a lot when interest rates are low.
You get more value, obviously, that's the private sector's same here. Is it encourages you getting more value for less expense. That's basically what interest is the expense, rent money.
I mean, I think that, I don't know how to write this into a policy, but I think it's just about planning. Like if you have a big expense coming, you want to, and as much as possible, do it when interest rates are low. And if you can't, you may have to defer borrowing when interest rates are low to afford it when it's high.
But you can't borrow without
If you
having
don't
the
have a
project.
Right.
Yeah,
You can't buy, and even if you anticipate a project, you can't like, you know, a
Take,
year ago or 2 years ago before rates went up, knowing we're gonna have these projects, we couldn't have gone out and borrowed $500 million.
Although I know a community that did next door to us.
Couple communities have and gotten in trouble.
Yeah, they're gonna get in trouble. They
It's-
just
it's a
haven't,
law.
yeah.
They did an override or,
No, they issued debt. They already had the authorization. The
Oh.
projects just hadn't started yet.
oh, okay.
So they issued debt before interest rates went up. And they're gonna end up in trouble.
You're required to spend the money, because it's tax exempt. There are rules, the IRS, that you have to spend the money within a certain period of time, in a certain percentage of the money in increments, like a construction project. Basically, you have to have it fully expended within 36 months. But there are milestones, you have to have a percentage expended by 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And if you don't, the penalty is the interest that you may have earned on the money, because remember, you rented it, you borrowed at tax exempt rates. So the bondholders are not paying taxes on that. And then while the cash is sitting in the accounts, waiting for the payments, the disbursements are made to the general contracting, we're earning interest at the taxable rate, but we don't pay interest. So the rules, the arbitrage rules, so the IRS, spend down rules that if you don't, you have to rebate those interest earnings to the IRS. And it's not just the extra, they go back to all your borrowings, and it can be very, very expensive. And then for some communities, it tends not to be a problem in Mass or Connecticut, because as odd as it sounds, we're conservative in comparison to the rest of the country, and in the conservative areas of the country, they tend to be very liberal with that, and they tend to be the ones that get into trouble with the IRS, because they use the arbitrage to fund services rather than fund the construction project.
I guess I wasn't suggesting to borrow before there's a project, but to reserve debt capacity
Mhm.
in anticipation of a project.
Well, that's
And
kind of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Hence why I forecast those higher interest rates, because once the authorization has happened, the project, interest rates spike, you have to know that you're gonna be able to absorb that. So that's why I always have to assume a higher interest rate to know that if the rates grow, it's still a financeable project. And that's what the committee always sees.
what is the Dave Davison forecasted rate? Still 7%? Hasn't budged in years, right?
Nope, and that's still not even 7, it's in the mid 5s.
Thank you.
Right, any other questions regarding debt service? Needham Electric Light and Gas Program. So this budget is actually going up fairly modestly, but if you'll recall, we had a pretty substantial reserve fund transfer last year. And then there was an increase, substantial increase in the budget for fiscal year 24. So fiscal year 25, we're not seeing the same increase. It looks like our consumption has stabilized. We saw that big spike during COVID when there were all these requirements for increased ventilation. So it appears that our systems are now working more efficiently. And that consumption has settled down. And in addition to that, we have contracts. We know what the increases are gonna be. And so fiscal year 25 looks pretty good right now. The only thing I have a note of is what might be a little bit up in the air is the gas,
Natural gas.
because you don't have a contract right now.
We don't have a contract. We're at the Eversource default rate, but interestingly enough, that default rate's cheaper than what we were getting for, bids for the supply of them. And it was interesting, our natural gas supplier that was under contract, they even recommended that we go to the default, because they said that, during this period of uncertainty, you don't want to lock into a higher rate. Now, there's always a gamble. All you need is, the war to spread in Europe or something happen, grander happen in the Middle East. But right now it's been pretty good, and we have another 8 weeks for natural gas, and then our natural gas period is December through mid-March.
And then you'll try to see whether it makes sense to go back out to bid or not.
Dave, could you just remind me again, I always forget how the solar works. Is it an offset to this, or is it separate?
It's two things. In this is what we pay Tesla to generate solar power, electricity from solar. That is sold by the town to Eversource. And we receive monies, and it's reflected in our local receipts estimate.
Okay,
We pay, solar, about 9 cents. And we've been averaging between 24 and 31 cents to what we sell to Eversource. It's a fluctuating rate.
but the difference, so the 9 cents is an expense item? Is it part of this
Yes,
budget?
it's part of this budget,
Okay.
yeah.
And then the 24.31 comes in on the receipts line?
On the general fund receipts line, yes. It's bringing in $1 million worth of revenue.
And it's about halfway through, it's equal.
Yes. For another 10 years, which, probably in another 5 or so, we have to start contemplating will the town do? The town has the option to buy out the entity. Or if the town doesn't buy it out, the entity will have to tear out everything and restore the site to its original condition. The town can decide that it's gonna go out to bid again and bring in another third party. Or perhaps the town itself may actually construct a solar array on its own, because we'll have that much more experience on its own. So there are things that the town's gonna have to consider in the next 5 years or so in planning for when that contract expires, which is in, I think, 11 years.
But those panels really, would need to be replaced.
Well, they would need to be replaced. The issue is the
Right.
superstructure that panels are on and stuff. But the company's required to bring it back to the original
Okay,
ground, and there's a bond posted for that to ensure that that happens. That's one of the requirements that was built into the original procurement.
And Dave, the planning for that, forecasting, the other types of things, Is that being done, who'll be doing that, DPW,
I anticipate it will originate with DPW, but of course that will be the select board, and they'll probably, as they did before, have a citizen committee. That they did last time, that it's basically a decision, there are three options that the town could take.
Yeah.
Take over the existing site, go out to bid and get new offers, or develop the site and be completely town run and sold. So those are the three items which I would anticipate need to be vetted through a public process, which select board would do.
And each of those will have its own pluses and minuses, and that's what we weigh up.
And also depends what the marketplace looks like.
And federal laws, because they keep changing what's more advantageous, leasing, owning,
Right?
so.
Because part of the benefit to the company that owns the solar array was tax credits they were receiving. So it wasn't just the money that we were paying them, but also the
They
tax.
get the benefit of it,
Mhm.
and my guess is those credits will be a lot less when the time comes, so it's probably more of a.
But now the federal government changed the rules so that the municipalities can get credits themselves directly. So the equivalent of what the credit would be as a check,
Yes.
so changes the incentive.
I guarantee it won't be the same in all.
I'm sure it won't. I'm sure it won't. Yeah, but we don't want to dispose of those, so
No,
we'll let someone else do that. All right, reserve fund. Reserve fund is a, formula, it's the last thing you can done. So according to the formula, the reserve fund would be $2.5 million. David, in the budget request included the history fiscal year. For a couple of fiscal year, 3 fiscal years of reserve fund use. It hasn't even been half of what was in the reserve fund, which doesn't mean we wouldn't need it. But last year we reduced it to a flat $2 million. This year, the town manager kept it level funded rather than increasing it by $500,000. So that's probably something that we want to discuss further. Thoughts, Josh?
Last, we've had so many different versions of this conversation.
I know.
I think 2 million was, I mean, it's obviously an arbitrary number. I mean, it's
Right.
sufficient.
Yeah.
But it's not the right number. We don't know what the right number is. And I think we had discussed readjusting the formula or asking Dave politely to readjust the formula. I don't know where that landed.
We haven't read this.
I don't think.
Yeah.
We haven't readjusted it. There have been no conversation, but we just do that on my own. So it has to have committees.
the formula's arbitrary.
Support.
Yeah, it was just developed as, this seems like a good amount.
Right.
So, I mean, some of the things that we should think about are, in addition to snow and ice and storms, which have in some past years really, and storms, not just snow and ice, but rainstorms, which in past years have required reserve fund transfers. Other places, public safety overtime has in the past required not insubstantial amounts, just at various times. And then the other thing is sped costs. Where we have told the school department that could, something really truly unexpected don't put in your budget now. Come to the finance committee if you have some uncontrolled unexpected sped cost. So those are kind of like the big items out
Right,
there.
those are the reasons that justify,
Right.
Leaving it where it is,
Right.
exactly. Yeah,
which I'm in agreement with.
so. Okay. And we haven't used have we used anything this year? No.
Yes, you actually did an early reserve. fund
Oh, that
transfer
was,
For the study.
Yeah,
for
for the
quiet
study.
zone.
yeah, that was a small amount though.
Right.
$100,000.
I shouldn't call it a small.
No.
one. Okay.
And then the town manager's proposed budget is at 2 million.
At 2 million, level funded, yeah. And then finance committee, tab 8, there are no changes to the budget, these are just calculations of where salary would be, calculations of where expenses would be. And we have not had any,
No, let me check. We're trying to focus on getting the word out through social media and local, newspapers, so to speak, because the type of position that it is, it's more of an interest in someone who likes government
and this maybe
And-
home.
and home, because it is a good part-time job.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting job, a particular one, Troy's working for the community and stuff. So hopefully that will generate some interest, but the more wider circulation didn't generate any.
So I forgot, I had asked you, did the schools, put it in their newsletters?
They haven't responded, I did
Okay.
email, so. Get them to-
Yeah, because that's another good group of people who may be interested. And then I
How
was
did
gonna,
Louise hear about it back when she?
I don't know.
Local newspapers, because the town of Wellesley Townsman had a connection to, at that time, we had needed time.
Oh.
Stuff, so.
Yeah. But it's a good position, it's a stipended position, you get a stipend every week. And some weeks there's work and some weeks there's no work, but summer's off, pretty much.
Yes.
I was gonna write this up.
Was it in, does the Needham Observer have the job for it?
No,
They don't.
not that.
Oh.
He left,
left.
Peter left.
When we need them.
So anyway, so that budget is, we're not really making any changes to it right now. Right, so preliminary budget recommendation, so everyone should have received the town manager's recommended budget.
Yeah.
This I can.
You got it now. So the way, the spreadsheet is set up, what I did is I put in the FY 23 budget that was voted at town meeting. I then had the actual expenditures for FY 23, so we could see budget versus actual in the spreadsheet. The 24 budget that we're in right now, and then the 25 requests with DSO fours. Then I kept the same format with the town manager's budget and then finance committee recommendation. I think that there are some budgets, and Dave, I sent you some question on the DPW. I think I need to walk through what the town manager did with that budget and the DSR force, because I couldn't follow the numbers. But there are some budgets that I think are gonna require, some discussion. I think we should also look at the financial warrant articles at the same time, because some of them do affect budgets and will affect budgets, if not in fiscal year 25, possibly further out in other years.
But do we
those,
know
or
them?
do we have them?
Yeah, we do have them. They're in the town manager's book.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll add a page to the spreadsheet with all the financial warrant articles. And then the reason I asked about the overlay is because it seemed very high this year. And so there might be a little flexibility, although Dave probably doesn't want to hear that, with respect to expenditures and funding. So what I had done is I highlighted those departments that I thought would require more discussion. I think if you can all let me know which ones you think should be highlighted, so we can quickly go through next week the rest of the budget. I did highlight those departments we haven't heard from yet. Health and Human Services and Park and Rec. My guess is Park and Rec will, it seems pretty straightforward. Health and Human Services does not. That was just my gut right now. And then townwide expenses, we'll have to make some adjustments based upon what we recommend. because we're meeting now on February 21st. I was hoping we could avoid a meeting on the 14th, if we can get through the budget, but if we can't, then we can't, then we're meeting on the 14th as well. But we seem to be pretty efficient with our departmental budget, so I think if everybody has a chance to review the town manager's recommendations and, really think about some of the DSR fours and how certain budgets were presented, I think we should be able to just focus on those budgets that really require further discussion. And there's a lot, I mean, it seems like there are a lot of items of discussion this year. So I don't know if anybody wants, to bring up certain items that they have right now, or are you comfortable with the process?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good, this is good, I like, this solution.
Thank you.
So next week is, Board of Health and Park and Rec.
Mhm.
And there was citizen,
And then the citizen committee.
And all the trained people will be here.
Next week? No, I'm not gonna have them here next week.
Oh,
Maybe
So
we'll-
your goal,
Yeah.
Louise, is so that's the 7th, not meeting the 14th, and then vote on the budget on the 21st. So what you're hoping to accomplish?
Or if we can get consensus next week, then, just be done.
I thought I had heard, have a focus on it, that there are a lot of DSR fours in the Board of Health,
There are.
they're always good.
so.
Yeah, so if we can't get to that, then maybe we do meet on the 14th. Because I think the letter is due to the town manager on the 22nd.
Oh, the 22nd.
Yeah. So I think 21st ends up being too late. I don't want to schedule an extra meeting on Monday.
Okay,
Okay,
I'll pay attention. I haven't read those yet, so I will.
okay. And then on the 21st, CPC will be here. And if the quiet zone folks are ready, maybe I'll schedule them for the same day. And do we have, will the warrant be closed?
Warrant, yes, is gonna be closed, Tuesday night.
Okay,
And it's long.
and normally what we do is we take up the recurring articles
Yeah.
early.
Which most of those are standard DSL fives,
Fives.
which are in the book.
Yeah, okay,
But what's in the book aren't all the financial warrant articles, it's just,
Most of them, appropriation, if that one wasn't in there because that came late to the game, but other than that, I think they're all there.
okay, fine.
In the financial, which requires an appropriation, there are lots of other warrant articles, by departments that don't require an appropriation.
Okay,
so when you say long, by number of articles?
Yes, we have, I think at least 2 citizen petitions, there's several zoning changes.
What are the 2 citizen petitions?
One is the rescinded debt, the 2.5. The town already has their debt decision in it to make it very complicated, because if they both pass.
That's the moderators.
Yes,
Problem to resolve.
so that could be problematic. And then there's a citizen petition that wants to change the definition of FAR, what's included in the FAR.
Okay,
So,
that one's so those two have already been,
yes, they've already received, had the 10 signatures and they've been filed with the town clerk. And the deadline would be Monday the 5th. So citizens have till Monday the 5th to submit something at 5 o'clock.
okay,
It's too bad we couldn't get the Board of Health, the Park Rec in here tonight.
Yeah. Definitely. Okay. Any finance committee updates?
On home, yes.
Yes.
Um,
Okay.
So we met on Monday. There was a lot of community feedback. So there was a survey that was done, 595 participants. And 219 people left written comments. So it was a lot of feedback, a lot of themes. I think just over half of people preferred the smallest option, scenario A, smallest in geographic extent. We discussed the possibility of, on Monday night, of having 2 warrant articles.
At least.
Yeah, well, yeah, there could be more. One for that, a base scenario, which meets the minimum plus maybe 10%, because we anticipate that the state may throw out some of the housing we calculated could be included in a discount that. And then 1 or more other options. That will be discussed more on the 15th, what that looks like.
Why would the committee? I thought the whole point of home was to get the feedback, which I think that you've done a wonderful job of really doing just that, and then recommending one path forward,
So,
not 3 paths forward.
so I asked, during the meeting, I asked for clarification from the select board on how far outside of the MBTA communities our charges authorizes us to go. Because I honestly don't know. I also thought the charge was just about the MBTA Communities Act. I mean, while we're talking about housing, I'm happy to talk about more things, but I want to make sure that the select board authorizes us to do that. I think the intent, so Brookline did a similar thing where they had multiple zoning articles, like a small one and a large one. And I think they both passed. The idea being,
They both pass.
they're like additive. So it's the minimum, scenario passed, and then they brought up an additive scenario adding on to that minimum scenario, and that passed as well.
That's, okay,
I guess I can see the logic of that, because we do gotta meet a standard. At least see that we can ensure that we can do that to the extent there's interest in going beyond that.
But the thing is, the MBTA communities is restrictive. It requires housing just within a half mile
Right,
of the train
right.
stations. Certain type of housing, it has to be,
Right.
at least an average of 15 units density. Needham could choose other things too, like it doesn't have. I mean, for the MBTA purposes, we do have to comply with those restrictions, but beyond that, we could be more creative because we're
Correct.
outside of those restrictions.
right, but we can always be more creative, like, this doesn't have to all happen as part of the MBTA Communities Act.
And yes, and that's what I asked for clarification on, essentially, like. Whether it's the home group or any other group. Any proposals, do they have to comply with MBTA communities? Is that, or can they go outside of that? There's also a timing question, like we can do that anytime, like it doesn't have to be right now. Although I know there's a lot of community interest in doing it right now. So it's stay tuned.
Given the work that's been done, there's some logic to that. I don't necessarily disagree, but
Except that there are certain things that are part of the MBTA communities legislation, certain restrictions that perhaps should not be applied to other zoning, even if it is zoning that the town would like to see and would support.
I mean, I'm
Like-
thinking of density
And
and
even just
proximity.
site plan review and all the, like,
Yeah, that's true.
there are certain, we may want to control more. Outside of the
yeah.
MBTA zoning.
No,
Um. Now we're getting into personal. Right,
But the financial impacts, we,
have not been quantified,
only very roughly, for operational costs. We're still waiting on,
I mean, assuming that stuff is actually built,
yes, it assumes that stuff is actually.
Assuming a build out.
Yeah.
right?
And, I asked for information related to capital needs. So at what thresholds do we need new capital based upon, population might be an easy way to do it, or, number of units, or, lot coverage, things like that.
I mean, there seemed to be, because I've listened into the last one, and a lot of discussion on the ramifications of additional density in some of these zones with like flooding and wastewater. And so that really hasn't been quantified or evaluated.
No,
Or the potential impact on schools and in our current capacity.
we've asked that.
Has there been any type of analysis or study presented back?
No, but the deputy town manager is collecting that information to see at what point we would need more classrooms or another school, or that's the way it's framed
how is she collecting it?
from the department heads.
Okay, so. The last time I think we saw a good study was when we zoned. The New England, was it the whole entire New England Business District? That was, I think, the last time, I forgot who maybe it was Judy Barrett.
I don't remember who. it was.
We hired a
Right.
consultant who actually put together a really good study and analysis. That taught, I mean, it talked about traffic, it talked about, wastewater, looked at our wastewater pump stations, improvements that were being made. And at the time, we were looking at potential medical facilities in the New England Business District, like, I think we're looking for something
Substantial.
done that way.
The consultants that we are working with do not do that work. They've said that themselves.
Okay, so a different consultant would be required.
And then really and John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all the analysis by McKibben for a school master plan doesn't take into account the MBTA communities
That's
at
correct.
all. So there's that.
Who's our rep on the future school needs? You are? When did you last meet?
December?
So you don't have a meeting scheduled again?
No, so he
To look
does
at
it, no, he does it sort of when, starts in September,
Yeah.
when we have the actuals, and then updates his information every year. So he just completed that in December.
So we wouldn't see that for,
No, so the discussion is that there was nothing for him really to study as far as
yeah,
what the potential build out, because there was nothing approved.
yeah,
So there was no,
Yeah,
so I would
makes sense.
expect, he'll have that for the work he does next fall. If, assuming something, even this, he can then work on something that's been proposed. Right now, nothing's been proposed. It's all under discussion. Because it even still is only gonna get passed in October,
mhm,
right? And so he'll have that ability to see what the build out, could look like. And just have to extrapolate it, because if you look at, well, one, you don't know when or if any of it's ever gonna get
Correct.
built.
I mean,
Because
right.
You have to assemble these parcels. I mean, it's all sort of balkanized, all these
Right.
different areas
Mhm.
where these zoning changes are gonna take place are all, there's all little pieces of parcel owned by lots of different people and entities, and everyone's gonna say, well, I want the most, so it's gonna be,
I know just
My own
my
personal-
experience at the hospital,
Yeah,
you know,
it-
been trying for years to accumulate
it's gonna
property.
be,
And it's-
Mhm.
so that's gonna be hard to do, because it's not like you have open fields
Right.
to build all this stuff on. But then secondly, you know, and we know going through our schools are, you know, what these master plan projects aren't gonna be increasing
Right.
the size of the schools, it's to modernize them. So it's not like we're building 50 extra classrooms to accommodate something that might happen. So even as we sit here right now, the facilities are all fully utilized.
But the population growth absent the MBTA communities is also flat,
Right.
Correct.
you
So
know?
that's why they're able, the current facilities are able to handle the flat enrollment.
Oh, and the next committee meeting, the date has changed, from March 7th to March 20th. So I think that has to be communicated. No,
How's the other committee doing?
which
The
other?
non-town one?
Oh, the housing coalition group
Yeah.
or whatever.
Oh, I haven't been involved in that. I mean, I've spoken to some people involved, but I don't.
And what are they, is this like,
Well, they had a speaker tonight. Was it
Yeah,
tonight?
was
Yeah.
tonight, yeah. And they recorded their presentation. I actually emailed them because I'm curious to know what they're
Mhm.
doing.
what is the purpose of that group?
I think it's an advocacy group.
It's an advocacy group that's advocating for a more expansive multifamily housing
Oh,
plan. So,
It's there's a weird tension, between the intention of the law to create more housing and the expectation that it's going to be very hard to create housing.
Right.
So do we plan for the maximum, or do we, or as some people have said, not worry about the infrastructure impacts because we don't anticipate it's going to happen very quickly? And that seems a little contradictory to me. You've got to choose what assumption you're working with first.
I also think there's been, and maybe there has been, and I've missed it, but there's been no real discussion other than a mandated density of housing or desired density of housing as to what the housing is gonna look like. So it seems to me that most of the housing becomes rental housing.
Or condos. There's no restriction on whether it's owner occupied or rented, or, yeah, there's no restriction.
I mean, really, what we really need though, this is just my own personal opinion, it's nothing to do with finance committee implications, is that we need different types of housing for different demographics. And so what we sorely need is entry-level housing that creates wealth for younger families. So we need somebody like a Levitt, you know, to come in and build, you know, change the zoning in an area so you can get smaller homes on.
That can only be done outside of MBTA communities, because the MBTA communities law, the minimum density or the minimum number of units per structure is 3, like you can have a triplex, but you can't have standalone under the MBTA communities. In order to comply.
And
Right, so that's my point for going slow, that would allow us to think more strategically about what we need.
From a financial standpoint, I've always been wondering, what the property taxes per acre are, depending upon zoning districts or types of housing. This, I should have asked when the assessor was here. Do you know, Dave, if that's possible to get?
It is, but it's building lot size. If, for instance, we have acre zoning, you can only build one house. And you can have 10,000 square feet, you can build on one house. building lot to building lot, so that extra land it's considered residual land and doesn't add much more value, taxable
But
value.
I think that if you're in an area where you can build 4 houses on 40,000,
Right,
Correct, that's what I meant by the
Yeah.
10,000 is,
right, but you can build 4 houses there, only 1 in the acre. My guess is gonna be the 4 are
It's gonna be
generating
more, yeah.
more, yeah,
grid density usually generates,
yeah.
both more housing and also more tax revenue than the smaller, the larger 1 acre,
Mhm.
lots and such. Now, of course, it's a large home and the tax bill is very expensive, but it doesn't but if you were building 4
You'd get a lot
homes,
more.
you would get,
I guess, another complication is when you have mixed use. If you have residential and commercial on the same parcel. Does, on average,
we have properties like that it's, the proportion that's residential pays the residential rate, and the portion that's commercial pays the commercial rate.
and so since the commercial higher, I would assume that on average, mixed use has more revenue, more property taxes per acre than residential.
It could, if you had new development, that way, most of the development that we have that classified, that falls into the mixed use is older properties. Hasn't been too much investment. We've had a couple in downtown Needham that have happened near the post office, for instance. But generally, most of the properties that are mixed use are the older properties from the 50s and 60s. If they were to be rebuilt and stuff, it would certainly be much more valuable than it is now.
And I discovered today we live in the Olin Woods district.
Yes, that's what it shows out when
I didn't even.
Sounds
I don't
so
know when.
luxurious.
That
Like,
material,
wow. What's that?
when did that material?
I don't know.
But, like,
I
yeah.
found that out today.
That's the geolocator.
Right.
On the phone.
Oh, oh, really?
Yeah. Interesting, huh? Sounds very, very,
Design.
or desirable, very expensive. So anyway, all right, any other updates from other members? No? Okay,
Move to adjourn.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
So.